Okay. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on taking action, reforming graduate education. This webinar is brought to you by the NSPN Graduate Education Committee. My name is Adriana Bankston. I'm happy to be moderating this webinar together with my colleague, Alessandra Zimmerman from the NSPN Graduate Education Committee. This webinar will facilitate a conversation on challenges posed in graduate education during COVID-19 and opportunities to reform the system as universities are ramping back up. Our panelists today are pushing forward policies that can improve graduate education from inside the university, as well as from the standpoint of other organizations that are major players in the landscape of higher education at the national level. The breakout sessions will facilitate critical conversations for graduate students to voice their concerns with the system and participate in devising new policies or altering existing policies that can significantly improve the academic landscape for current and future generations. We hope this event will be informative for all of you, as well as inspire you to take action towards improving graduate education. In terms of logistics, just to remind everyone, please mute your microphones during the presentation to reduce the background noise. This webinar is being recorded. A recording will be available on YouTube at SciPol Network Media following the event. And we'll move on to introducing the panelists. So we'll have Alessandra briefly introduce the panelists who will discuss their work in graduate education for approximately 10 minutes each, followed by 30 minutes of discussions in breakout rooms. We'll then come back together and share major takeaways from the breakout rooms and wrap up with future events from NSPN. So with that, let me turn this over to Alessandra to introduce our panelists.
Okay, so we're going to be going on order of the slide shown. So if you want to drop the screen share, so Rigoberto, our first speaker, can set up his presentation. So Rigoberto Hernandez is the Gomp Family Professor of Chemistry at Johns Hopkins and the Director of Oxide. He will be talking about equitable education and what you can do to ensure that academic inequalities exacerbated by the pandemic are removed in the new normal through and beyond the pandemic. So go ahead and take it away. You are still muted here, Rigoberto.
I thought I pressed the unmute, and thank you, Alessandra. This is a good feedback. So first, thank you, Alessandra, for the invitation and the nice introduction, as well as Adriana and the rest of the team that put this together. And many thanks also to those of you who are listening. I think we are all engaged in trying to improve graduate education, and we can always make things better, right? And so this is and the opportunity that's presented to us now through the pandemic or COVID-19, where everything is upturned, is perhaps an amazing opportunity, because it helps us realize that everything can be changed, and perhaps we can change it toward the better. I'm going to speak today a little bit about equity and the role of equity in graduate education, mostly to provoke you into thinking about how to where are there opportunities to rethink graduate education. And again, when I mention COVID-19, it's not to say that we have to only be responsive to the pandemic. In fact, if anything, what I want to say is that there will be a new normal post COVID-19. The question is, what is that new normal going to look like? And that new normal should be ideally one which provides the best education for our students and for yourselves, and it should not necessarily just be different because of COVID-19. It is an opportunity to really move forward. Some of the work that I've done, which is why I was invited, is through the Open Chemistry Collaborative in Diversity Equity. So I just wanted to tell you what that program is very briefly. We understand what an acronym is, but the two C's we took together and we made it into an X. And so that's where we got oxide. And oxidation chemistry is something that chemists know all the time, like redox reactions. So it made it look chemical. approach has been a disciplinary approach to trying to understand the barriers and the solutions to our community in the context of equity. And we've been working with policymakers, department heads and chairs around the country to try to help them change their procedures so as to provide equity for all of its participants. One goal is to ensure that the access to the faculty will be representative of the population, and as well as the graduate student population, as well as the staff. And so we've been doing quite a bit to monitor and measure that. In order to be effective at our goals, we realized that we needed to have conversations with chairs, between chairs, and with subject matter experts in the social sciences that could tell us about those barriers and solutions, as well as people who are feeling the inequities so as to bring to the attention of the chairs what solutions could be brought in. So we convene the chairs with others once every 2 years. We've written reports, and one of those reports is noted here in the bottom. It's available, maybe not publicly available because it may be through a paywall. I don't know, depends on what your access is. You can find many of the materials and all the materials at our website, URL oxide.jhu.edu. So that's who we are. And of course, I'm not alone. As I'm not alone, as you saw, my team member, Dr. Dantari Stallings, he's the assistant director of Oxide, and he's now at University of California in San Diego. So I owe a lot to his efforts. So diversity and inclusion, and if I had 60 minutes, we'd spend a long time trying to define what diversity and equity means. So I'm going to give you in a nutshell what I mean by diversity and equity. The joke picture on the left is that, inclusion, diversity is inclusion, or is everybody other than you. So that we have a large number of faces and perspectives. Historically, universities understand diversity in the context of, oh, we are better because we have people from all over the world who come and are attracted to come to our institutions. The failing is that they historically didn't do a good job of saying, if we have underrepresented groups that we don't have good representation from, then we're not the best. So realize that we need to have diversity to be the best, and having diversity is a sign of that. Then you can start to say, well, inclusion means it's not just that the people are there, but that they're actually included in the conversation and that they have equal and equitable access. Well, actually equitable access. So the joke on the left is that a theoretical chemist like me should be in the lab. And so that's how there would be inclusion of my ideas into the experimental setting. But the challenge with equity is that you might have thought that the way to solve diversity and inclusion is to give equal resources to all people. The trouble is that not all people need the same resources, and so it's not equitable to give everybody the same resources. So equitability is you give resources to people according to what they need to succeed, understanding what barriers are placed in front of them, and understanding what challenges they may or may not have in order to be to reach that. So one challenge, for example, could be that they don't know what the rules are. So if there are hidden rules, then it's an equitable situation, because those people who know the hidden rules don't have the same challenges as someone who does know the hidden rules. And so in order to be equitable, you make sure that everybody knows the rules. And so that changes the barriers in an equitable fashion. So that's one example. We can talk about more in the context of graduate education. The hidden rules versus the actual rules is key. More than once have I heard a fellow colleague say, oh, don't the undergraduates know that if they apply to graduate school, they don't have to pay for graduate school? Well, that's true in the sciences. It's not true in the humanities. So it's a hidden rule in the sciences that your graduate education will be paid for. Or maybe not so hidden, but it's an apparently hidden rule because not all undergraduates know that. And they make decisions without knowing that they don't have to consider paying for their graduate education if it's a PhD in chemistry or a PhD in biology, and that indeed they'll be paid. So providing access to that information makes it equitable. Okay. Now this whole business is about being competitive or inclusive excellence. It's about being the best. We want you to be the best students. We want to have the best graduate schools. And so inclusive excellence is really the raison d'etre, because we are all better if we have and interact with people from diverse groups. The faculties in chemistry are not diverse, or at least they're not commensurable with the availability in the doctoral student pool. Just as an indication here, in chemistry, looking at the top R1 institutions, the percentage of unurbanized and minorities is about 4 to 5% among the faculty, which is far from the general population. So what are the barriers, and what can, from that, where do we go to solutions? There are lots of barriers. I realize I'm running out of time because I spoke too slowly. So I will just tell you that I gave you an example of inequity in terms of knowledge. In terms of understanding the rules. There can be inequities that arise from implicit or unconscious bias that many of you may have heard. There are many others. So solo status or stereotype threats in situations where, when you have an oral exam, it's not that the student doesn't know or does know the material, but the environment that they're being placed in makes it less likely or more likely for them to succeed. And so as we think about policies for graduate education, we should be conscious of all of these types of barriers and make constructs that are equitable. And so specific challenges, and one example is, do you have, in a forum like this, ask everyone to show their face or show their environment? And it turns out that not everyone is camera ready, so they might want to just show you the left-hand corner of this without their picture. Or they might be concerned about what's happening in the background, so they may want to show a background screen, but we know that background screens also make it very heavy or make it hard for the video with lots of images. And so that might not be equitable if they don't have high bandwidth. The most camera ready is if you can see my background and you can see me. Can we expect everyone to show themselves and be camera ready and have an environment that's camera ready? And what does that do in terms of being equitable and feeling like you are an equal participant as your colleagues? So humans do science. Now that we live at work instead of work from home, we really have to consider how that affects us as well as our students. I'm going to just give you a few sound bites to think about as you make policy. You should judge productivity, not time in. Far too often people say, oh, someone's in the lab all the time, they're great. But that doesn't reflect the reality of what they can do. Just like in universities, there's a RPT, or Retention, Promotion, and Tenure Committees. We should think about RPT for graduate education. That is, don't just think about getting a degree. Think about the process of the student coming in, the training in, and where they're going to go once they leave, and really have the experience be one that is part of that pathway. Help students build and support their professional networks. That's part of their training. When you think about letters of recommendation, and when you think about how you're evaluating students, are you using grindstone words or ability words? And how is that equitably being used with respect to the students in your group? There are individual development plans. This is one of my pet peeves. I think individual development plans are awesome. They should be owned by the student. There's also something that should be done that's part of that, and that complements the individual development plan for the student. It's part of their graduate education that can be owned, co-owned by the student and the faculty and their various mentors. So let's start to reimagine IDPs so that there is the part that we recognize what's owned by the student, what's owned by the faculty, what's owned by the university, and then raise expectations along those lines. And again, no hidden rules, equitable and transparent rules. We have made lots of recommendations for not just for students, but for faculties around the country. And this is just some examples from 2019. I don't have time to go over them, but I can encourage you to go to our website, and you'll hear and you'll read about a number of things that the university departments, at least in chemistry, could do to create a more equitable environment. So what am I suggesting for managing that we have to be intentional in managing inclusive excellence, setting diversity equity as part of the policy piece. It has to be intentional, and it needs to be contextualized within our professional cultures. I could say more about what Oxide has done, but I won't for interest of time. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to take questions whenever I'm allowed to.
Okay, so the breakout room with Rigoberto is going to be very active, I can see. We're going to transition directly to our next speaker, Marilyn Dahlberg, the Senior Program Officer and Study Director with the Board on Higher Education and Workforce and the Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine at the National Academies of Science. She will be speaking of the science of mentorship and the report they recently authored, and the role of identities in mentorship and the power dynamics in mentoring relationships. So go ahead and share and start whenever you want to.
Lovely. All right. I have to put myself off mute as well. So I don't actually have a shared screen. I'm going to be speaking directly. Yes. Hi, my name is Marilyn Dahlberg. I am in fact a study director with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And I want to definitely thank you all at the National Science Policy Network for inviting me to speak with you today. I had the honor of working with the Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM project that we released this past fall. That study focused on both undergraduate and graduate educational contexts, but most of our findings spanned both contexts. And today I really want to focus down on the role of power dynamics in mentoring relationships, which are important all the time, but especially right now with all of, well, this. So before I go any further, I want to make sure that we all understand and define what we mean by mentorship. And I'll note that the definition I'm going to put forward isn't just what feels right to me, but one that was developed by the committee of experts based on the social science theories that underpin our understanding of social and developmental relationships, and on the definitions that we came across in the literature. So the committee's definition of mentorship is a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. And I'm going to point out a couple of things in this definition. First of all, power dynamics in mentorship is not something that you can just define your way out of, but it is important to set a clear set of mutually agreed upon expectations. And I'll note that that's probably going to be a theme of what I talk about here today. 2, the words working alliance are pretty key. This means that the relationship involves mutually setting goals and working together. 3, it is to the benefit of the relational partners. And that removes both the assumption of a dyadic, that means 2 people, and the unidirectionality of the relationship, it going from person A to person B. Finally, it involves both career and psychosocial support functions. And that's pretty key when you think about how mentorship is involved. I'll note also that it says nothing about the context in which the mentorship is engaged, that being like a STEM laboratory, or the roles of the people involved, say your PI and your grad student. The definition works just as well for the Black in STEM hashtag on Twitter as it does for a grad student dealing with their research advisor. So in a lot of the traditional assumptions about mentoring relationships, there is a presumption of trust or authority, which are not the same thing, that is placed with the mentor, a singular person. That is commonly because this relationship is defined as a way to bestow knowledge and skills on the less knowledgeable and skilled member, the mentee, also singular. It's about how to make that mentee more like the mentor. It's an apprenticeship model. Especially in research settings, there's a focus on the career support functions. That's, how do you write a good grant proposal? Who to connect with to advance your career? Which challenges should you take on next? And if you're really lucky, the promotion of your work through sponsorship. But what are those power dynamics that exist in that hierarchical dyad? The mentee, your career progression, your development is all dependent on one person. It completely ignores the psychosocial support functions of mentorship, and it assumes trust, which can force interpersonal dynamics that might not actually exist. So let me take those sort of one at a time and break them out a bit. First, any system with a single point of failure is a bad idea. Not to mention that even as we heard in the last talk and in multiple other settings, A diversity of perspectives enriches pretty much everything we look at. Talent and human capital development, which is basically what grad school is, included. If that one person, for whatever reason, has to leave the system or leaves the system voluntarily, the mentee is often left with little or no support or backup systems on which to rely. Moreover, it completely disregards that not all mentors are willing or able to provide all of the support functions necessary. We all know people who are really good writers or editors, or those who know how to listen, or those who offer creative solutions, or those who are amazing role models, and those who promote your work and your talents, and those who challenge you in different and unexpected ways. And we all know the people who don't do those things. And rarely do we know one person who can do all of that. But I promise you that that person who could probably has a ton of mentees already, and they're probably exhausted, and they probably need a break. Second, focusing only on career support functions and not providing any psychosocial support, one, by that definition I laid out at the beginning, is not mentorship. It's advising or career advice, right? Two, it ignores the evidence and research about the importance of engaging both STEM and non-STEM identities if our goal is truly to develop and enhance our research. Mentorship is a social relationship, and as such, identity. That is how a person considers their self, the way they think about who they are, the way they are viewed by the world, the characteristics they use to define themselves. Identity plays a pivotal role in those relationships. So what happens with something just human happens? If a mentee is heading to a conference and they don't know what to wear, that hidden curriculum comes back and bites them in the butt. What happens then? Who do they ask? If the mentor doesn't consider their behavior role modeling, what kind of micro or macro cultural norms are they propagating and setting? Third, assuming trust or assigning trust in anybody is a bad idea, or at least it's rarely a good idea. My own personal bias is that assumptions in general are rarely a good idea. Trust is a fundamental element of effective mentorship, but it is something that is developed through discussions, explicitly laying out your expectations, negotiations between the mentors and the mentees, and above all, a mutually agreeing upon the relationship and its boundaries. Participants in a mentoring relationship should have an expectation of privacy, not just about what is discussed in the relationship, but also about what they are going to discuss. Trust that the relationship is a safe space to share what they need to share. That expectation needs to be developed over time. There are some cases which research point to as being more likely to have trust develop more easily, at least initially, such as cases where there are demographic or other what's called surface level similarity matching between in mentoring relationships. But that trust can just as easily be built when there are deep level similarities through the use of culturally responsive mentorship skills. Those skills can be developed through mentorship education, by the way. And by and large, the onus is going to be on the person who has more power to create that space, to earn that trust. So that brings me to my last little bit. What can we do to move from the assumption-filled, power-skewed, hierarchical dyads that we think of in mentorship to more effective, inclusive mentoring relationships? So the report lays out a whole slew of recommendations. And at the end of my talk, I'll link over to both the report and to an online guide that you can dig into a little bit more. But to start off, support, encourage, and have multiple mentors. One mentor is concentrating the power, the advice, the influence in one person. That is impractical and ineffective. This isn't just a recommendation for mentees to pick up either. Mentors can encourage their mentees to seek other mentors. Department chairs can reward their faculty and staff that mentoring students who are outside their labs or in departments is a good thing. Provosts can create official mechanisms that institutionalize and normalize the practice of having multiple mentors. And even professional societies can create mentoring programs that support and develop opportunities for going outside of your college or university to seek other mentors. Within mentoring relationships, tools like IDPs are great. Mentoring compacts or agreements, mentoring plans, mentoring maps. Really briefly, mentoring or an IDP was referenced in the last one, so I won't go into that, but a mentoring agreement, right? That's developed between the members of a mentoring relationship and lays out explicitly at the beginning and preferably in writing the expectation for all of the members of that working alliance. It can be very useful to return to later to see if anything is and everything is on track, to determine if what might need to be altered or adjusted to fit the changing nature of your relationship. And trust me, your mentoring relationships will change with time. Mentoring plans are written from the mentor's perspective to figure out how they will engage, and mentoring maps are written from the mentee's perspective to identify what types of mentors they might need and help identify who those people might be to serve in those roles. Finally, I cannot stress enough how strong the evidence is for mentoring relationships in developing the skills and competencies of mentorship, as well as the use of multiple different types of mentorship structures. Not only will these help diffuse the power, but they're just good and effective mentoring practices. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions once we get to that part of the conversation.
Okay. So thank you very much, Maria. And then we have our next speaker, Erin Suderman, Program Manager in the Engagement and Development Department at the Genetic Society of America. She will be discussing ways to create more meaningful virtual opportunities for early career scientists to connect and engage with each other, including career development support groups, book clubs, writing projects, and virtual workshops. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. I'm Erin Suderman from the Genetic Society of America. And first, I'd just like to thank the National Science Policy Network for putting together today's webinar and for this generous invitation to be part of these discussions. This is a really exciting group to be with. So first, I'll just give a little introduction to the Genetic Society of America. GSA is a professional membership organization for scientific researchers and educators in the field of genetics. We serve an international community of scientists. We have about 6,000 members from 50 countries last time we polled that. As a society, we advance biological research by supporting professional development of scientists, by communicating advances and fostering collaboration through our scholarly publishing in our journals Genetics and G3, through holding or hosting scientific conferences for our multiple model organism communities, and also through advocating for science and scientists. And our members govern the society through an elected board of directors, and then most of our programs are run by countless volunteer roles. So in the engagement department, we are formed as part of GSA's mission to help scientists develop their skills and achieve their career goals. And to do this, we've designed multiple programs and initiatives trying to provide experience, training, mentorship, and community. We recognize that graduate students in our field don't always receive the same formal training in multiple areas, such as becoming good peer reviewers or gaining leadership skills. And so with this in mind, we try to develop programs that help to level the playing field and provide an opportunity for all graduate students to access these skills or access training for these skills. And to do that right now, we have two main online virtual programs, our Early Career Scientist Leadership Program, which is broken out into multiple subcommittees and working groups, and they work on projects, delivering or providing deliverables for our community, but also at the same time developing leadership skills and making connections throughout the field. We also have the genetics peer review training program. This is a year-long program where we teach graduate students and postdocs the skills for peer review, and then also pair them with editors for our journals to help get feedback. In addition to these programs, we also provide professional development workshops at our in-person conferences. So that's a little background about our society, but I want to talk today about how we're responding to the COVID-19 crisis, both in what we've done and how we'd like to plan to move forward in the future. So, as you can imagine, with a society that's most visible while we're hosting in-person conferences, COVID-19 has been pretty significant. Our main conference was the Allied Genetics Conference in April, and we decided to cancel in mid-March. So we had 5 weeks to turn around from an in-person conference to a virtual. When we did this, the scientific programming was the first to move over, but in our department, we tried to decide, or tried to keep in mind, how early career scientists, both graduate students and postdocs, would be most affected. And we recognize that a great deal of the importance that comes from scientific meetings isn't always the scientific programming, but it's the interaction during poster sessions, the back and forth that you get when people come because they're doing similar projects, or the people you meet when you're in sessions and even in line for coffee. So we wanted to think about ways that we could provide this in a virtual setting. A few things that we did in the 5-week turnaround that we had, where we really wanted to move the posters online. So we put the virtual posters, asked people to load a PDF onto our Figshare site, and then in addition, asked them to do a walkthrough, about 2 minutes to just walk through their poster and try to put a face to everyone's research. We also put together Q&A Zoom rooms and paired about 5 presenters in each room, kind of based on topic, and invited the community to jump in and ask questions to people, and then had these moderated by staff. We expanded our poster invitations, where we allow graduate students and postdocs to fill out a form and invite any scientist. It was really easy when it was online because it could just go right to your Figshare site. And then another way, we also did topical discussion rooms, just having Zoom rooms that were moderated by more advanced or more established scientists in the field, and then open to graduate students and postdocs to try to give everyone a chance to meet people in their field still. And then we also had Slack workspace, or a Slack workspace dedicated to the conference. And along with having Slack channels for model organism communities and topical channels, we also tried to do things like postdoc channels, and labs could post if they had postdoc openings, and graduate students could advertise themselves as looking for a postdoc. And we were extremely encouraged by the response we saw on Slack. Lots of grassroots efforts came out of that. Social hours were planned. People kind of found their group. And so that was really exciting to watch happen from our staff point of view. Those are the things that we were able to do. As we move forward, there's a lot more that we want to bring to this virtual space, because we realize that early career scientists are really at risk for losing so much with not having conferences to attend. So as we prepare for the 2021 conference season, we have a few things in our minds as we're starting our planning. We're hoping to put together some sort of virtual conference mentoring or buddy system, and invite first-time conference goers, particularly from HBCUs and underrepresented minority groups. Bring them to the conference and then pair them with peer or near peer mentors or buddies to just try to have a form of check-in, kind of guide your way through the virtual conference and encourage scientists to expand their network and kind of share their networks with each other. We're also hoping to do virtual training and just provide kind of tips and tricks on how to make the most of a virtual space. And we're working in a new set of rules here as you reach out to people by email instead of over coffee or over lunch. So that's kind of what we're doing with conferences. In addition, we have our ongoing virtual programs still. And as a society, we're trying to kind of bulk these up, add more staff hours, and give the programs a little bit more ownership, because we've recognized that many graduate students and postdocs have more time to focus in these areas. So we've upped our Science in a Snapshot webinar series, where early career scientists can join, present their research, and then it's followed by about 10 minutes of discussion. We're also letting them host workshops, giving them a platform. We've had a few really successful ones in science communication and a career development panel, and trying to gain the skills of planning these webinars and then also bringing deliverable for our community. And in addition to that, we're just trying to provide a support system for our early career scientists. We've had our participants organize book clubs, have career discussion and kind of check-in channels. We communicate mainly on Slack with our community, and just trying to see our early scientist community in a more holistic way and address them in finding careers, providing mentorship opportunities, and just opportunities for online engagement. So these are things I'm really interested in hearing more about and workshopping a little bit. But that's where we are right now as a society. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions when we break out.
Okay, thank you so much, Erin. So we now have our last speaker, Dr. Jamaine Davis, the assistant professor in the Department of Biochemistry, Cancer Biology, Neuroscience, and Pharmacology at Meharry Medical College, and is a member of the Center for Structural Biology at Vanderbilt University. He will be discussing the benefits of academic mentoring through scientific societies. And go ahead and take it away, Dr. Davis.
Okay, hello, sorry for that delay. Happy to be here. I wanted to share my perspective and some of my experience on participation in academic societies. I am assistant professor, as was mentioned, and I think that I overlooked some of the benefits in career development within these societies. And so in my capacity, I can function in various spaces based on my research. So as a structural biologist, one of the primary societies that I've been a part of was Biophysics and Protein Society. But as I became an assistant professor, some of my interest has shifted to incorporate some more kind of a well-rounded approach to understanding disease mechanisms. And so I became involved in the American Society for Cell Biology, and I was actually kind of, one, overwhelmed because it was such a large meeting, and two, overwhelmed by the different resources that I didn't know existed within these societies. And so the ASCB has a variety of programs that actually foster career development on different levels. And as you can see, basically from their website, they can put it by different career stages. And so when I first got into the society, I was very impressed by having these different outlets that represented me, kind of not just the diversity in me, but kind of the overlapping interests that I had in cell biology and also as a minority scientist. So the ASCB has a MAC program, the Minority Affairs Committee, that actually has the objective to increase the visibility of minority scientists and to also foster career development activities. And so I became a Fred Fellow in one of their programs back in 2015, and it actually paired me with an external mentor that would help me write grants and get exposure within the field. So the mentor I chose for the program was at Scripps in California, and the MAC program, the FRED program, and gave me resources to travel there and give a talk, as well as give resources for my mentor to come to my institution and give a talk. So that kind of exposure was really great. The MAC program and a lot of the career development programs at the ACB have other avenues based on your interests. And I think that they make a really tremendous effort to try to cater to the different careers that trainees and scientists aspire to kind of to go into. And so they've taken a lot of time, energy, and resources to provide kind of an interactive forum where you can kind of get what you need out of the society. And so I've tried to benefit as much as possible with all the programs that they have. So I've applied to numerous things and was lucky enough to be selected not only for the FRED program, but also for the visiting faculty program. So I, under the same program, under the MAC, the Minority Affairs Committee, there was also a fund that enabled a visiting professorship. So I got to spend 2 months in my mentor's lab to go and get some experiments done and use the resources over at Scripps. So that was tremendously helpful. And seeing the actual resources that the programs in these societies have has actually kind of made me a lifelong member. Because they invested in kind of my development, I feel that it's a great place, a great space for me to engage. And even going to the meetings, I know when I was an undergrad and even a graduate student, it seemed a bit overwhelming because if you went by yourself, you know, it was hard to navigate. With the MAC and the greatness of the society, I was able to get in and to actually have friends before going into the meeting. And so that helped me navigate through not only going through the various aspects of the meeting, but just being a part of a community. So I've been really interested in helping the ASCB, particularly the MAC committee, to really further their reach and really impact more people. And they also have another program, oops, sorry for that, this Mosaic program. And so the FRED program, actually, the Faculty Research Education Development Program, actually helps with grant writing. In some institutions, you don't have kind of an outlet to or a forum to actually get help with grant writing all the time. So the societies actually have this forum to actually help you develop your grant writing skills. And we know that it's actually, you know, an iterative process, but a lot of these forums give like year-long kind of mentorship to help you develop those skills. And from that, I was able to successfully submit a couple of grants and actually got a few of them awarded. So I owe a lot to kind of this unexpected mentorship through the ASCB MAC program. And additionally, it also provides peer-to-peer mentoring. So I've met a ton of people in my same position, junior faculty, struggling to get grants. I really hope that it expands more because you get to meet people that are on the same trajectory and you have such a great kind of interaction kind of like, I don't want to say misery loves company, but going through this process as a team rather than individually. And so this definitely helps, particularly at this time now with COVID, because there's so much uncertainty that it's really hard to know what to prepare for or what not to do, because we have this issue where we're not sure which campuses are opening back up. But what some of the MAC committee and some of the societies I belong to is using as a network and a support network and a resource. And so it's helped to kind of navigate through this kind of uncertain process and to really kind of provide some sort of activity to kind of reduce some of the anxieties that we have with the current times. As you know, it's you know, we've never been through a pandemic, so it's hard to prepare, but we know that kind of together we can kind of make it through, and having kind of this network is going to be critical throughout from here on in. And I also think that, you know, with the kind of advent of COVID, we are rethinking how we're going to teach and learn and communicate. And I guess maybe a couple of years ago, you know, pre-Zoom, people giving seminars remotely wasn't really a big thing, but now you see that it's going to be, it's probably a stable part of our education and so and research. And so hopefully this will lead to more research talks for everyone, and it will help expose and expand your network to actually you know, help you throughout your career. And so one, I recommend, depending on the areas you're in, looking to see what resources these organizations and societies have that suits your career, and then also investigate and explore. They're very welcoming. Hopefully the fees are not too exorbitant, but I think they're all manageable based on the career level. And then use it to really provide that support network that helps get you through, you know, some of these kind of uncertain and difficult times. And so that's all I have. I hope to kind of have more discussions in some of the breakout rooms as well. So.
Okay. So that talk kind of neatly wrapped up all the previous three concepts. So if you could stop screen sharing, we will start transitioning to the breakout rooms. So each breakout room will have one moderator to help guide the conversation, because the goal of the breakout rooms is specifically to create the initial steps of policies that the attendees might be interested in generating in their institutions. So we have here the list of moderators. Some of you won't stop hearing from me. And then afterwards, one of our goals is to report back and talk about what was discussed. So if you could go to the next slide, please. We have kind of a rough structure for the breakout rooms. The first 5 minutes will be a mix of introductions and a decision on which policy to really tackle as a group. I believe there is right now about 10 people per breakout room, so there should be a good mix of people discussing what's the most interesting thing for them. There will also be one panelist per breakout room as kind of the resident expert, but some of our attendees have done these policies as well. So we definitely don't want a hierarchy at all in these rooms. It's completely a free-for-all brainstorm. We're also going to do a strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats analysis to get a rough idea of what we can do with these policies, and then start to break down actionable items that we can start with. So the thing we were going to do when we came back was report on some of the conclusions that came out of our breakout session. So as one of the moderators, I can start it off, and then I'll pass it along to the other three. So my section kind of talked about 3 different policy initiatives. We had one angle of engagement of undergrads who are looking to a PhD and seeing how they could match up their interests and potential mentors. We had one who was interested in reporting of racial harassment. And then we had one who was interested in having graduate students more active in the hiring process. And kind of across all three, one of the big things we talked about was the first small step. So there is that urge for grad students to fix it right now, but that's not how most departments work. They tend to enact policy at a much slower pace because they're there for a much longer time. So we discussed like small initiatives that can get the ball rolling, make professors more comfortable with upcoming change, and also prove that there is grounds for that change. Even though we likely know that it's necessary, not everyone is already on board at the start. So we discussed a couple of small steps to take to start the policy discussion. So whoever, another moderator wants to go over theirs.
I can go. I was in Breakout Room 1, and we had some really good conversations about a policy looking at how to develop a recognition kind of reward system for the work outside of graduate student research and how that could be implemented at a departmental level. So we really had good conversations about what benefits that might give. It's not only going to benefit the graduate students to show that their work is valued outside of their excuse me, bench research, but what they're doing for the community is highly important as well. And it's not going to just benefit them, but it also benefits their mentors as well. So that can be information that a lot of PIs or advisors will put into grants to talk about what they're doing for the community too. And so we talked about how that could be a definite strength and a lot of self-interest value as well. Some of the weaknesses we were talking about are how to stop this from being a self-reinforcement system. Is it already going to benefit advantaged students or privileged students in the departments? And it's going to be a very much so a specific basis department per department. Kind of continuing with that SWOT analysis, we wanted to give students the option for tailoring their recognition, having an anonymity option if it's going to be a benefit or a harm for some students to put their name out there for what the work they're doing. And lastly, some faculty members might not be up to it. That might be a direct threat to kind of a policy implementation like this. And so some of the comments made by participant Amanda, she was saying that at her institution, they had a town hall plus a signed letter by students to kind of talk about specific asks for a policy like this and how it would be beneficial. And she said it went over pretty well. So thank you everybody for participating in that.
I'll go next. What it's worth, I'm representing group 2. So our breakout room really was struck by the question that was asked actually by one of our participants, Giovanna, about this notion of, is there actual responsibility for mentorship in the graduate student education? And I think, we all said that there should be, and that it should be established through a number of ways. And we kind of looked at it at a number of different levels. First, at the university level, are there ways that we can consider making mentorship a part of an annual review process for different faculty members to see, are they taking mentorship seriously? Are they moving towards directions of increasing what the skills and addressing some of that unspoken curriculum that was mentioned in the panelists. It also was brought up of addressing this more at a national level and seeing if funding, such as grants provided by the National Science Foundation, can also tie mentorship to their notion of broader impacts or other criteria, so that not only are universities addressing this, but also all universities are kind of implicitly addressing this as they apply for these federal grants. And I think as we got to this point in the conversation, Jermaine brought up a really good point that this conversation of benchmarking for mentorship still presumes that we have a good definition of what mentorship looks like, which I think needs to continuously be a good question. And Jermaine also had the great experience of having kind of established those expectations at a student level. And I think at that point, Cynthia had a really great suggestion of groups like the National Science Policy Network that's made up of graduate students or recent graduate students to advocate to scientific societies to help identify departments or universities that have been doing a great job at mentoring and providing some kind of recognition or award so that other universities and folks at the national level can see who graduate students are identifying as great exemplars of mentorship. So I think that's 3 really great actionable steps that really address this issue kind of holistically. So our group did a stellar job, I think.
And to wrap up, I'll represent Breakout Group 3. We also talked about how to incorporate mentorship into tenure and promotion packages as a way to really incentivize faculty members to invest in this as a important cultural change for departments. And then we also discussed potentially changing the committee structure and or dissertation requirements for graduate students such that once a graduate student identifies that they're interested in an alternative career path, post-candidacy or at a certain point, they then have tailored requirements and tailored people on their committee that represent those interests. So an industry member on their committee and or a requirement for an industry externship if you want to go into an industry career, kind of taking a model more of the medical and veterinary education system where after a certain point you track and or specialize and you no longer take courses that are in things you aren't passionate and or interested in. So really bringing that kind of a framework into the graduate education field as well, so people are putting their efforts into where they most see themselves, and which leads to more productivity and job satisfaction if you're aligning values and skills with the work you do. In terms of talking about how to go about making these changes and where to start and who you talk to, there was definitely some discussion about feeling like a lot of this work is bottom up because graduate students feel it and see it, and so they're the ones organizing, again, outside of their work responsibilities. But in order for change to occur, it really can't only be bottom up, but oftentimes it's made to feel like graduate students are the ones who need to make or advocate for these changes, but it really needs a top-down approach too. We recognize that many departments and graduate school structures are so different from different universities. Some universities have a very active graduate school that oversees different departments. Some are more in college structure. Some programs are interdepartmental in terms, so how is accountability and policy going to really happen and who do you talk to? And we ultimately decided that going to trusted faculty and administrators in your department who you have good relationships with is a great place to start, to facilitate having some of these conversations, to at least to start making those, like Alessandra said, small moves toward actionable changes rather than huge shifts in culture.
Okay, so thank you all for participating. Adriana will close out, and then if we have time, we might stay for a couple questions, but I see we're starting to edge over our time limit.
Great, thank you, Alessandra. Thank you everybody for participating in the breakouts. It sounds like it was a really great conversation, and hopefully we'll continue this discussion beyond this webinar. So I just want to, before wrapping up, talk to you about a few upcoming events from NSPN